Hello, this is Alexia and Hayla from Rare FM and Student Music Network, and we're here with Polly Mackey, also known as our school girlfriend. She'll be putting out her second album, Soft Landing, on August 4th, and today we'll be talking a little bit about that. So, first question, I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on the creative process behind choosing the album title, Soft Landing.
Yeah, it's one of those things I cannot remember the moment I decided to call it soft landing. I had started noticing this phrase like everywhere. So I must have seen it once, like, and it had an effect on me. But then I kept seeing it in like books, in news articles, like basically like every couple of weeks I would see the phrase soft landing. And I would be like, this is the universe speaking to me, right? But apparently there is this thing called the frequency illusion where it's like your cognitive bias. So like you see something and it has an effect on you and you keep noticing it and you think it's, the something bigger than, your earthly surroundings are speaking to you. So it was definitely that, but just the phrase of it, I really liked just how it looked, how it sounded, and it really tied in with a lot of the themes on the album, which is, I would sum it up by saying it's like about the second coming of age you have, I think, in your late 20s, where everything around you kind of like lands a little bit and you start to figure out what life is about, what makes you happy, what your priorities are. And all of a sudden, you kind of realize those things are in your immediate surroundings and they have landed around you. And I think we're so driven by the kind of youthful idea of, happiness is in the future, happiness is far away, you have wanderlust. But I think definitely getting to my late 20s gave me a lot of kind of wisdom's the wrong word, but a lot of kind of like sense of happy melancholy about, where I'd landed basically.
And you mentioned previously in some interviews that electronic music has the ability to craft unique atmospheres and spaces. So I was wondering, how would you describe the space and the ambience that the album creates?
So the kind of space is something that was a really important part of the production process to me this time. So my last album was all about infinite space and kind of like lush reverbs, and everything sounded like really high definition. And it was all about the kind of the sonics and the kind of what's the word, like impeccable sounds, which is quite easy to achieve with music production now in terms of the plugins and the software being so powerful. So I kind of wanted to do the reaction to that a little bit with this album, and I wanted it to sound like smaller and grittier and boxier. So I wanted it to sound like an electronic album played by a band in a room. So that meant maybe not using all these kind of amazing infinite lush reverb sounds and actually running stuff through a guitar amp and miking up the room instead. So atmosphere and space was definitely linked into a lot of the kind of sounds in this. So we did a lot of analog outboard gear stuff, tape delays and springs and cassettes. So it definitely sounds a lot more kind of like human and raw, which was definitely something I was aiming for.
And I know you said that as some of your influences is usually like guitar rock in terms of like what you've been listening when you were younger. How would you find like this kind of almost perfect balance between like the spacey stuff that you've been doing previously and this grittier sound that you said you were working on?
Yeah, so I was listening, well, I was basically getting back into thinking about why I started making music in the first place. And like through listening and going to gigs and the feeling of energy that it gave me. So I grew up when I was like 10, I was a skater. So it was like Linkin Park, Korn, Limp Bizkit, Slipknot. And then when I got a bit older, it was Pixies and PJ Harvey and Yeah Yeah Yeahs. And so this is not chill music. This is not bedroom music, which I kind of have become known for making chill bedroom music. So I definitely wanted to access a lot of those feelings again. And so immediately for me, that meant that, the speed of the music just got quicker and the energy and the rhythms got more kind of energetic and immediate. And so that was a really conscious thing to do this time, was to kind of address that and think about how it was going to sound live as well.
Are there any live elements that you're looking forward to incorporate in your performances on your upcoming tour?
Yeah, it's always a little bit of a puzzle figuring out the live stuff. When I was in bands, it was the other way around. We would write stuff in a rehearsal room or kind of within our laptops, but then we would tour it for like a year and then we'd go in the studio to try and capture what that sounded like of us playing it live. Whereas this is like it's studio based music made in the studio. And obviously we play, there are live drums, there are live guitars and everything on the record, but figuring out how to play it live is like a really fun puzzle. And I always want it to kind of stand in its on its own as its own particular thing. So not to sound exactly like the record, but how it kind of have like be an elevated version of it. So yeah, there are live drums, there are live guitars, bass, and then obviously a lot of electronics incorporated into that. And we kind of those moments where it goes quite big on the album, we try and push that like even more live.
Going to your latest single, Real Life, it features at the end sound of birds and it all feels very spacey yet natural. So I was wondering what was the experience like writing and producing the track, and if you have any special moments writing in the studio for the album or for this track in particular.
Yeah, so for this track, we did a lot of atmospheres in the studio of running guitar pedals through these kind of sustainer not guitar pedals, running guitars through these like sustainer pedals, and it allows you to basically like freeze certain notes. So we would layer upon layer these notes so it just didn't sound like a guitar anymore, and then run that through all these kind of like weird tape pedals, so you're getting all this kind of like warp sounds happening in the background, and then layering that with these like beautiful string lines on that melody. And then my partner came in and she did some backing vocals on it as well, which really elevated it again. And kind of when that climax hits, it's mostly her singing and it just, yeah, it sounds amazing.
Speaking of the writing process, one of my favorite lyrics so far has been from Heaven Hanging Low, pulling the planets out of the sky, taking a bite. I love that. So I was wondering if you have any particular lyrics that are your favorite from the album.
Yeah, the lyrics for that, I was challenging myself a little bit. So my lyrics always tend to be slightly stream of consciousness, slightly abstract, quite poetic. But with that one, I gave myself a parameter in which to write within quite quickly. So I knew I wanted it to have this kind of like weird, like religious tone, which I've never written like that before. Like I went to religious school when I was younger, but it just doesn't affect my life. I'm not religious, but I kind of there's a lot of beauty in religious imagery and like the kind of myths and the stories and legends and whatever, but there I wanted it to feel like I was writing a song, like I was praising, you know, this higher celestial feeling, but it was actually just about my relationship in my domestic space. So the idea that you've accessed this crazy celestial feeling that people get, you know, thinking there's something bigger than them, but I was actually just getting that at home. So that imagery of that one in particular about pulling planets out the sky, taking a bite, is kind of referencing Eve in Eden, you know, pulling a apple off the tree and taking the bite of it. But again, I wanted it to feel a bit more kind of celestial than that. So yeah, that was a really interesting one to write, and I'm quite proud of those lyrics. Other ones on the album, again, there's a track called The Weeks, and the whole lyrics all the way through are just sets of like 3 lines. So 3 lines, 3 lines, 3 lines, and they're all like these little bite-sized chunks of like thoughts. And that one is about being in lockdown in the countryside. So there's a lot of nature imagery and some really beautiful lyrics in there, but there's also this undertone of like slightly like panic and depression underneath it. So that one's kind of about, you know, being in this beautiful space and seeing this like the seasons change, but also, you know, having to talk, you know, I say like I pulled you off the ledge, you know, your partner spiraling into, you know, a bad place mentally and things like that. So that was one that I really enjoyed writing as well.
In the same song, it was also a lyric that was, You've Never Lived So Light. So I was wondering if that has to do anything with the album title.
It actually hasn't, but it I do notice now because I've written so many songs in my life. I can go through and I can spot little themes of stuff that I keep coming back to. And obviously, like my last album was called Is It Light Where You Are? And the whole theme about that and that song in particular was about how it was a breakup and it was a long distance phone call with an ex, and how I felt like in quite like a heavy, dark place, but they felt like they were in like quite a light place, but also thinking about the time zones, like, is it physically light where you are? And then the lyric, yeah, on Heaven Hanging Low is you've never lived so light. So obviously I feel like I've something's come out there about feeling in a really, really light space. So it's interesting hearing other people interpret your lyrics and you go, oh, yeah, you're totally right about that. That's exactly what was going on.
You've written most of this album in your bedroom studio, but also then you said that a lot of sounds have been added later in like the actual studio. So, how would you say the transition has been for you?
Yeah, it depends on the track. Some of the tracks, like The Weeks, for example, was just a drone and a drum beat when we went into the studio. And then I wrote the chords and I wrote the melody and the lyrics, and then we really concentrated on the outro. It tends to go in this kind of like really heavy guitar direction. So that was very much like formed in the studio. But I would say there's a few of them like Out There and even Heaven Hanging Low and A Place to Lie, the whole beginning section of it, where when I left, my home studio setup, it was pretty much already there. And then we took it into the studio and then we just like gave it its extra 10% or like replaced the drums with live drums and like retracked the vocals and stuff. So there's definitely no right way in which I work. I like to leave space in the studio for, these really kind of spontaneous, genius moments to happen. But I also like to go into the studio sometimes with a track that I know exactly what needs to happen. So there was a combination of those for sure. And I've got my own studio now. So I think a lot more of that process is going to happen in my own space. But being in a big space with speakers and a live room is just such a fortunate space to be in and allowing ideas to happen there.
Talking about the collaborative process, I was wondering if you have any specific artists you'd like to collaborate with in the future, since you haven't had any previous collabs on the albums apart from the remixes, but those count.
Yeah. Well, on this album, I've actually got an artist called Tony Njoku, who is featuring on it as a singer, but he also wrote the melody and lyrics for that and did some additional production on it as well. And that was great because that was a track that I'd had as like a loop for a while and didn't really know what to do with it. And any melody I was coming up with just didn't feel right. And so I sent it to him and what he sent back was then just like it blew my mind and it became one of my favorite tracks after me almost like leaving off the album. So that was a really beautiful moment to have that. And I definitely on my next record want to definitely collaborate with more people, also because I've got so many friends who are musicians, but we actually really make music together. We're trying to do that a lot more now. We've kind of got a group where we kind of go into the studio and spend some time together and just see what happens. So yeah, definitely want to be working with musicians a lot more in the future for next stuff.
Lastly, I have some rapid fire questions. Favorite instrument?
Oh, that's hard. I would say the Udo Super 6 synth.
That's very specific.
Yeah.
Is that just to play or just for the sound?
It's I've never got a bad sound out of it, and it always surprises me with really interesting what I call like song starters. So I can hit something on it and it just inspires me instantly. But the humble guitar will always be probably where I write some of my best songs.
What about a favorite song at the moment?
Oh, this is really tricky. My mind's gone blank. Hang on, I just need to look at my Spotify really quickly. This is supposed to be rapid fire, but this is not rapid fire, is it? Oh, there is a song that I've been playing in my DJ sets called Love and Me by Beltra. Yeah, I played at my DJ set recently for this Pride party and it just like went crazy. And it's just a really beautiful track, but it also just made people dance so much.
Favorite sound?
Favorite sound, rain on a tent.
What about favorite sound while producing?
Whilst producing, rain on a tent. Actually, one of my tracks has got it starts with the sound of rain. So,
And lastly, favorite song to perform?
favorite song to perform at the moment, it's been a track called Out There, which is on the second half of my album. But yeah, at the end, it just kind of evolves and blooms into this like really beautiful outro, and I've been really enjoying that one.
Thank you so much, Polly, for joining us today. Stream, buy, share the album Soft Landing, and also we're very much looking forward to your upcoming tour this fall.
Thank you so much for having me. Nice to speak to you.